most couples are like, well, we want to be in the same boat. And I'm like, you don't want to be in the same boat because then you lose yourself entirely. When we're talking about differentiation, it really means being able to stay connected to ourselves as an independent and separate person from our partner, meaning, our partner can be in a bad mood, they can disagree with us, and we can still hold on to a sense of ourselves. We can still hold on
Mm.
to our partner as being okay and a good person, but just different.
Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show. I am so excited that you are joining me for this very hot interview that I just did with Todd Baratz, who is an online therapist and a real in-person therapist too. But I know him from Instagram. That's how we actually met, was through on the interwebs. We were following each other, and he's at Your Diagnonsense. You might know him. He is very tongue-in-cheek, but he's actually a really great clinician, and he has a book that is coming out called How to Love Someone Without Losing Your Mind. Forget the fairy tale and get real. And that's exactly what we did in this interview is we got real. So I hope that you enjoyed this interview with Todd as much as I enjoyed interviewing him. Wow. I'm super excited to welcome Todd Baratz to the Terri Cole Show. Hi, Todd.
Hi, Terry. I'm excited to be here with you.
Right on. So we actually, you guys, full disclosure, we actually started and we're yakking and doing our thing. And for some reason, there's like a nor'easter where I live and it just cut out the power and cut out everything. So we're coming back. So this is really take two in a great way. So I feel warmed up. How about you, Todd?
Yeah, I'm lubed, fully lubed up. I'm ready to go. Yeah.
Very nice. Thank you. What I was saying at the top was how I found you, which was
Yes.
through social media. And what I was also
Instagram.
saying at the top is that how so much of what I love about what you put out there is that you take complicated shit and make it accessible. And you also don't look at it from one point of view. So I love your take because it's true story that life and love are messy. We have been stalking each other, we said at the top before, for quite a while around the interwebs. And now here we are in real
Mhm.
life.
Finally. Woohoo.
Woohoo, yay. All right, another
Yeah.
woohoo to talk about is that you have a new book. The name of the book is How to Love Someone Without Losing Your Mind. Forget the fairy
Yes.
tale and get real.
Yeah.
Now, I think all of us could use the forgetting the fairy tale part for sure. But I want to just
Yeah.
start by talking about for you, why, like, what inspired you to write this book?
Myself. It's
Mhm.
really just no. I mean, I've struggled with everything and I've been in therapy forever. And my own personal journey is what led me to be a therapist, and my own personal experience in relationships and sex has led me to specialize that in my as a therapist and write about it. I would be struggling with something with my ex, and then I would have a client or a couple, and they would come in and be struggling with the same exact thing. And I would say, what the fuck is going on? We're all going through struggling with thinking about feeling same things and all thinking that we shouldn't be, or all thinking that something is
Mhm.
deeply wrong with us or our relationships. And,
Mhm.
sometimes something is wrong with our relationships, but nonetheless, I was becoming acutely aware the more I worked, the more I experienced how common and universal a lot of these emotional themes were. And so a lot of
Mhm.
the inspiration comes from that realization that, we as therapists get that often most people don't get. They don't get to hear the same kind of love and breakup and suffering and cycles of pain that we do. And
Mhm.
so the inspiration really comes from some of that observation, both of myself and my clients and in the world of, what it has come to mean as living people, that we really do share a lot relationally, emotionally, and psychologically. Most of the book is about that kind of thread that connects us all.
What's interesting about being therapists and being therapists online is that it's almost like removing the curtain or moving the curtain away, where you'll have some people present in a way like they have it all figured out, like, or
Mm,
this is the way. And I think that I don't really identify that much myself with leaders or people who are doing it that way. I love people who are saying, hey, I learned this. This is what happened for me. This is what I learned, or this is what happened with my clients, because then we can understand, right? There's just such a myriad of experiences you may have. And I feel like therapists, a lot of times that people will put us on pedestals, like
Yeah.
Well, obviously you, Todd, have it all figured out. And you're like, okay, no.
Yeah, I've made a lot of new friends recently because I tried to live in LA for a period of time and went crazy. But a lot of them were like, when I met you, I didn't realize that you were going to have problems. And I was like, I have a lot of problems. Like, why would you think that? People objectify therapists, either that they have a ton of problems and they're the most fucked up of us all, as that saying goes, or that, we have so much wisdom and never struggle or suffer. Neither are true.
Correct. So you are a couples therapist, a sex therapist, and a regular, I don't know if it's regular, but one-on-one therapist as well. Is that what your
Yeah.
practice is comprised of?
Yeah, I'm a therapist. I mean, again, all similar themes. I mean, people hear sex therapist, their ears perk up and they're like, "Oh, you must hear really crazy, kinky stuff." And I'm like, I mean, it's a lot of relational anxiety. It's a lot of
Right.
trauma. I think of myself really as a generalist, but my specialization as,
Yep.
you know, we are often categorized as sex and relationships, but that's everyone who is at least everyone who's having sex, not having sex, having relationships, whatever.
Agreed.
Yes, I'm a therapist.
So yes, I am a therapist.
Yeah.
Correct. So question though about we all do lean towards specializations, mine's
Yeah.
relationships as well, boundaries,
Mhm.
effective communication. I too consider myself a generalist because anyone can come in and I can pretty much help them, right? If they do the work.
Yeah.
But for you, was there anything in particular that inspired you to want to? Because sex therapy is also specific, meaning helping people with their intimate interactions and behavioral patterns and lives. That is specific. And you would find a lot of therapists not, they would not say that they were a sex therapist. You know what I mean? So for you, what drew you to it?
Well, the first therapist that I saw that I currently see that I write about in the book, Derek, he is a sex therapist. I first started seeing him when I was 15, not because of his specialty, but just because I was seeing him. He asked me questions about my sexuality, and it was really impactful. And so then when I got to grad school and nobody was talking about sex, we had one class that was like about sexual orientation, sex, couples, gender. I was like, what? I knew that this was something that I wanted to specialize in because people often assume that sex is about sex, just sex, but
Mm,
it's really about attachment. It's really about emotion and vulnerability and who we are as people and who we
hmm
are as people politically. I mean, it's about so much. So I find that really fascinating that how something can so collectively be reduced and minimized to something physical, yet it can actually contain some of the most meaningful stories about who we are as humans and how we were raised and how we love. I
hmm
find helping people understand that so they can experience pleasure really exciting and cool.
So really, a lot of what you're doing around the sex stuff is by talking about it openly, you're breaking down stigma, being like it's okay to talk about it. Because you would find, or I would think that in this day and age, we wouldn't still be so uptight about sex. And we are as a culture, I
Yeah.
think. I don't know. Am I wrong?
No, totally. I
Right?
mean, it's historical, it's a cultural thing. When you grow up, you don't just discard the values you learned growing up, they stay with you. And similarly, culturally, collectively, historically, this has been such a sex phobic, sex negative, sexist, misogynist, shitty fucking culture that,
Mhm.
it's still part of our present.
Yes. So you're helping break down the stigma, but when you think about personally, what did you learn about sex growing up? So you luckily you had this intervention at
Nothing.
15 with someone who
Yes.
normalized the conversation. But from your family of origin or from your society, what did you learn?
Nothing. I mean, as a gay person, I learned that I could die.
Hmm
I learned that sex was about birth. But I mean, beyond that, I mean, I didn't get a specific education.
Right. Yeah.
Few people did.
Yeah. I think growing up, when I grew up and where I grew up in suburban New Jersey in the 70s and 80s. And the whole messaging to me was don't do it. Just don't,
It's a
hold
lot
on to
of
your
fear,
virginity as long as possible. Oh my God.
a
D-
lot of sexual fear.
So much. And never about, not even the thought of having a conversation about sexual pleasure. And what was that about? Because it was all about good or bad. It was bad to do that. So why would there be a conversation beyond that? So let's talk a little bit about who this book is for.
Anyone who's feeling stuck. I wrote it from a place of feeling stuck. My clients come into me with their concerns about love and relationships in life from a place of feeling stuck. People who are wanting to find relief from something related to love, sex, life.
Mhm.
And I think everybody is looking for some kind of relief from something. Again, that's a cultural desire, relief from some negative experience because it's so hard to tolerate. But it's really for anyone who wants to learn something about that. The last chapter is called Give Up Hope. It's very philosophical. And I talk about how it's important that we give up hope for this suffering to go away, that it's just, that's not what it means to be alive. The majority of the book is about my relationships, my clients' relationships, culture, but it is also about trying to expand the way we think about our lives more philosophically in terms of suffering and beauty and pleasure and all of the things and welcoming all
Mhm.
of those things into our lives.
So you recommend, let's talk about this a little bit because I just started doing this. So I want to know why you recommend it. You recommend interviewing your parents.
Yeah.
Why? What sorts of questions do you think we should ask our parents and why do you recommend it?
Oh, everything. I've had a problematic relationship with both of my parents. I love my mother to death, but I could not have fully understood her or our relationship or my childhood without understanding who she was as a human being. And we
Mm,
often objectify our parents as being parents, as being put on this earth specifically for us, because as children, that's how we understand. But as
mhm,
adults, not so much. And if we want to work through earlier traumas or attachment issues, we have to understand who our attachment figures, caregivers are and were. And so for me, it was really crucial to humanize my mom, not just
mhm,
as this woman who was a mother, but as a woman who grew up in the 40s and someone who didn't get what she had given me in terms of, I guess, stability. And she
yep,
was never encouraged to seek partnership that was safe. And, she experienced a lot of her own personal traumas that made it hard for her to show love. So, learning all this information about her really helped me, one, learn information about who I was, because I found that a lot of the themes that she was struggling with, I had inherited, were
mhm.
intergenerational. And it was helpful for me to forgive her from some of the things that I didn't get from her, because I now had a deeper story for who she was. And so I do think this is a really crucial story that everybody has to explore. Easier said than done. I mean, I'm a therapist and I ask people about their lives all day. So asking my mother about her life, was not that difficult. But I know that for many people, part of their family rules is don't ask, don't tell, and or their family will live in a state of denial. So it can be a challenge, but if you really want to learn about yourself, you have to learn about your intergenerational story. If you really want to recover from some of these attachment wounds or reconnect with a parent, you really have to humanize them. And this is one way in which you can, which was really powerful for me. You said you started doing this?
Yeah, I did. My mother is 86 and I mean, independent, lives alone, drives, like does her thing. So she's 86, but she's very well.
Great.
And there's this thing called Tails. That's the name of it. And it's just cards. And I just starting with childhood. And it's helpful to have a bunch of questions to ask, but in learning about it's like I feel like I've done like a ton of therapy in my life. I know I have. I've been in therapy for many, 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 many years, decades. So I feel like I've kind of worked out this stuff. But what my interest in doing this was for, in a way, my family. I have sisters and nieces and nephews, and like I want to put something together, even if it's just an hour long thing of
Mm,
my mother talking about things that we should know and things that were important. And it's like exactly what you said. It's about humanizing in a way. We look at these human beings only in like how you relate to me, right? And
mhm,
yet looking at them as like, oh, look, like you were the queen of the GE ball. Oh, look, you had to drop out of college because you got knocked up and there was no abortion then. Oh, look.
mhm.
And you still managed to do like there's so much more generosity
Yep.
that I felt for my mother over the many years after becoming a therapist 25 years ago and just really getting the story as you're saying. When you're 19, 20, 21, you're like, these are all the ways you failed me. I can't wait to tell you what a rotten parent you were. And it's not to say that listen, I'm a parent. Every parent, just FYI, is going to fail their kid. You already did. If you're a parent, you already did. Just accept it and apologize for it when they get older. It's okay. Like, because they're the same way that in relationships are messy, as you're saying in your book, the same way that being a human being is messy. Parenting is messy. And nobody gives you a like book that says, hey, this is how you do it. I actually
which is
married a widower.
outrageous.
Those bastards. They just throw you in. And if you don't, for me, I inherited kids. And so I did just skip the terrible twos altogether and just went headfirst into the terrifying teens. So
Which is
there's,
hard.
oh my God, so hard.
Ooh.
And yet, again, for anyone listening, anyone watching this on YouTube, if you had a horribly abusive parent, I'm not thinking that maybe this is the best exercise for you, right? Like if you've gone no contact, there's no need to reconnect to interview that person. This is really for if you have a relationship. I mean, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not speaking to your parent because they were abusive and are currently abusive, don't reach out.
Exactly. You talk about in the book and on social as well about how society tends to sort of over pathologize the normal
I think,
day-to-day struggles. So it's
yeah.
like you call it a cultural diagnosis. So let's talk about true toxic traits or red flags that we should really look out for, as opposed to like everyone is toxic according to the interwebs.
Yeah, toxic's really, I wish you could like, if something should coin the, I don't know, it's like a business in itself. Because, there's been decades of toxic people who have hurt others. And I think it's a real kind of reaction to that. We're all trying to protect ourselves by
Mhm.
becoming extremely hypervigilant around who is toxic. Just because someone's an asshole one day doesn't make them toxic. But you can still have boundaries with them if you are feeling hurt by them. But what things are really toxic? I mean, abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, someone disregarding your boundaries over and over and over. And,
Mhm.
what else?
Oh, I mean, listen,
What
you
else
have
is
the cluster
actually
B
toxic?
personality disorders that, where these behaviors a lot of times are found. And yet we also have the over diagnosing of people like everyone's a narcissist, which can't be true. And yet I do
No.
think there's more narcissists out there than report, right? So usually the numbers are really low. They're like 6% of the population are narcissists. You're like, are we depending on narcissists to self-report? Because they're not going to,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of hurt people that are hurting people that are hurting
Mm,
people and cycles of abuse and intergenerational cycles of toxic dysfunction and horrible things that happen. And some people are able to recover from that and some people are not.
yep. And I feel like that's a combo of nature and nurture too. Like I could have the same, clients having very similar life experiences and some sort of thriving after just talk therapy or EMDR or whatever, and then some just not being able to. What is your experience in your practice with that?
I don't know much about genetics, but
Mhm.
I do know much about psychology and philosophy. And I do think that if you plant a seed in a garden and you give it light and whatever seeds need to grow, they grow. If you
Mhm.
don't, the seed's just not going to grow. Or it will grow
Mhm.
and then it will break and it will grow and it'll break. So, I mean, I think a lot of this is about nurture and
Mhm.
environmental stressors and trauma and access to resources and some of it is luck and timing and some things are genetic, but I would put more of my money down on nurture,
So, and what
environment, relationships,
exactly. Yep.
etc. And not
It's
and like from year 0 to 20, 0 to 50, especially, I mean, the
yeah.
early years.
Yes. The resources though and the access is also huge
Yeah.
because there's this certain level of privilege. If we can get an intervention at an early age, then the likelihood of you overcoming difficulties, later in life, it's like growing the skills, someone teaching you the skills that a lot of times our family of origins didn't have to teach us.
Yeah.
I mean, mine didn't. I don't know about yours, but mine was all like, just drink, you'll feel better.
Oh God.
which
If
is
only it
true.
were true.
Well, it's true for a
Is it?
moment.
For like 5 seconds, if
Exactly.
that,
Let's
between
talk
two
a
and
little
one.
bit about differentiating and why it's important in a long-term relationship. So for people listening, talk about your thoughts on what it is and then why it's important.
This was something that was so fucking difficult for me in my past relationship and is very difficult for me in my current relationship. It's so connected to codependency, but it isn't codependency. Differentiation is a process that starts when we're kids. We initially can differentiate from our family, and that's the process that starts happening, when we become teenagers and we start exploring and experimenting. And in an ideal world, our parents would say, go explore, be independent, express yourself. Who are you? We're curious and fostering this. But in many families and in mine, certainly that was not the case. I was really discouraged from exploring my independence and threatened and resources removed whenever I did. So
Mhm.
when I got into my relationship, it was really hard for me to be an independent person. So when we're talking about differentiation, it really means being able to stay connected to ourselves as an independent and separate person from our partner. Meaning, our partner can be in a bad mood, they can disagree with us, and we can still hold on to a sense of ourselves. We can still hold on
Mm.
to our partner as being okay and a good person, but just different. One of the analogies that I really like, David Schnarch's analogy, which is, ideally a couple isn't in the same boat. They're in two separate boats getting closer together and more distinct. And that I think really
Mm.
encapsulates the definition of what differentiation means. And
Mhm.
most couples are like, well, we want to be in the same boat. And I'm like, you don't want to be in the same boat because then you
Mhm.
lose yourself entirely. But it's really important and often a huge source of codependency and resentment and lack of desire, and self-loss and unrecognized dreams. It can be challenging, especially if you come from a place where that wasn't part of what safety looked like in a relationship.
Yeah, I love this. And I see this with my therapy clients and a lot of they're women, 30s to 80,
Mm.
but because of the identification, right, of what it means, what it has meant in our society to be a woman, quote unquote, you're just raised and praised for being self-abandoned and codependent. Like,
Hmm.
that's it. Like, just you having an independent self, differentiating. It's part of why I never thought I would get married. And I stumbled upon my husband. It happened. Once I thought I wouldn't get married and kind of didn't care, I was like, I built an amazing life. I don't need to get married to be valid. It's okay. And I'm no more relationships with men with unexamined minds. Like, no. I mean, I just was so done with that, the frustration of someone not having any idea about their internal life.
Same girl.
And you know what I'm talking about? I know you do.
Yes.
But what ended up happening was that the moment I sort of dropped the need for it and just decided that it would be okay, I ended up meeting and falling in love with my husband. And he was someone who was so psyched that I had a big career and a big life. And like, he was so pumped to be in the front row and be like, go girl, without feeling threatened. Now he has his own big career and does his own stuff and gets, he gets embedded in war zones, and he's an artist. He's like a visual journalist.
Oh,
But it was so refreshing to be able to be in a relationship and be differentiated with someone who was whole enough themselves. Keep in mind, he was in his 40s and I was in my 30s when we got married, right? So he had already had 20 years of therapy, and me too. So I think that certainly helps when people are like, oh, it was magic. You're like, no, it was years of psychological stuff that made it work. But I agree with you that the differentiating is so important. And I really love, since codependency has been such a focus for me, because the new book is about that, it's like shining the light on what it actually is to be codependent. And there is this overlap between not being differentiated in your relationship, being enmeshed in your relationship, being codependent in your relationship, and how much of the self doesn't get developed when we live that way.
mm. Would you say that codependency and differentiation are the same? Just codependency has been popularized in a different way. Kind of feel like they're very, very similar, but maybe there are
Very,
minor
very similar.
distinctions.
But I don't know the distinctions because I don't know that I'm expert enough at differentiating what the books would say it actually is. I know what it is, of course, as a therapist, but I do think, like as you're talking about it, what immediately came into my mind was codependency. It was high functioning codependency,
Yeah.
and how the sense of emptiness that a lot of my clients will describe, being in their relationship and yet feeling unfulfilled. And they're like, I don't know what's wrong with me. We never fight. We get along great. I'm like, well, first of all, you are confusing compliance with compatibility, and they're not the same thing, you know? But
Yeah, I mean, also not fighting doesn't mean you're compatible. If anything, it means maybe something's not right. Something's off.
it might mean you're conflict avoidant.
Yeah.
Could just mean that. So tell us where people can find you. You guys watching, listening, the book is How to Love Someone Without Losing Yourself. Forget the fairy tale and get real. It just came out 2 days ago. I'm so excited for you, Todd. Tell us where we can find you.
Thank you. Yes, How to Love Someone Without Losing Your Mind. You can find me on Instagram at Your Diagnonsense, or you can go to my website, which is toddsbaratz.com, and check me out there and buy my book. Thanks.
Please buy the book. It's so good. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. I so appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.